What's the most ducked up thing the US government has done? The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Back in the 50s and 60s, the US military tested several different biological weapons on and unbeknownst to the public. They specifically targeted low-income and poverty-stricken areas. They tested things from chemicals to viruses. It wasn't declassified till 10 years ago. Edit. Sources. Edit 2. Why would they declassify it? Freedom of Information Act, United States, required them to disclose this. For years, so many people were arrested, disappeared and even dismissed as conspiracy theorists through this. I can also say that chemtrails aren't a thing. I work aerospace and the altitude that these planes are flying wouldn't do anything. Planes would be flying much lower like crop dusters in order to make any effect. It's literally vapor and exhaust coming from the planes, and some stay longer because of the different altitudes, temps and RH that they are flying. Edit 3. Since people are still arguing to me for chemtrails, here is the science that debunks it. The silencing, embarrassing, and killing of Gary Webb. Gary Webb was an investigative journalist who proved that the CIA was selling massive amounts of drugs, particularly sugar, to typically black, poor neighborhoods all over the US. This was in order to fund an overthrow of the Nicaraguan government by US-friendly terrorists during the 90s. He was forced to resign, disgraced, blacklisted, divorced, and found dead with 2 bullets through his head in 2004. It was ruled a suicide despite the facts he owned no guns, and it being 2 bullets through the head in a suicide. The Trail of Tears is pretty up there for most ducked up thing. Edit. Yes, I know slavery happened. I'm not arguing that this was worse, I just named the first thing that popped into my head. Sandy Creek Massacre. 500 Colorado cavalry were sent to track down natives that were attacking settlers, for good reason, but that is a long story. They ended up coming to a Cheyenne village that was known to be peaceful. Its leader, Black Kettle, was a voice of peace for the natives and had even gone to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Lincoln and negotiate a lasting peace between Americans and Cheyenne. Lincoln gave him an American flag and told him that so long as it flew in their camp, no American would harm them. Anyways, this arsehole Chivington was leading the cavalry, and saw it as some kind of noble duty. After months of searching for aggressive natives and coming up empty-handed, the government ordered him to disband his force and go home. Chivington, now faced with the prospect of his crusade being an embarrassment, decided to attack Black Kettle's village, basically just to say he did something. The Colorado cavalry attacked in the middle of the night in mid-November, while everyone was sleeping. Eyewitness accounts are terrifying, and basically women, children, and men were run down as they tried desperately to flee across a frozen river. Black Kettle ran into the middle of the battle waving the American flag and screaming that they were friends of America. But the Americans turned on him and he was forced to drop the flag and flee as well. The fact that Black Kettle survived is miraculous, but most of his clan did not. And the few that survived the battle mostly died of hypothermia and starvation from literally fleeing through a frozen river in the middle of the night. Cavalrymen raped live and dead women, including children, and cut off male and female genitals and strapped them to their horses as decorations. Black Kettle and what remained of his clan ended up getting sent to a reservation, where they mostly starved to death. And Black Kettle gave up on peace as the younger generation flocked to warlords like Roman Nose and Crazy Horse. This ended up contributing to Red Cloud's war, as did most of the other atrocities in the West. Oh. Also, Chivington was known to have said, "Nits make lice," a statement that referred to his campaign of exterminating native children along with everyone else. Oh, and I'm already sure Colorado nearly elected him governor after all of this anyways. I mean, there was the time the National Guard shot and killed coal miners and their families who were being horribly exploited by coal companies, so they were striking. See also, the Ludlow Massacre, and the time they decided to routinely sterilize Native American women, and the Guatemala syphilis experiments. The CIA testing birth control on unsuspecting women in Puerto Rico. Operation Wetback, along the lines same ethics of the Japanese internment camps, but not as well known. I'm sure that for every ducked up thing we know about there are even worse things that we don't. Agent Orange. depleted uranium arms that polluted battlefields, people's homelands, and left generations of people with birth defects after the war was done. Well, this probably isn't the worst thing America has done since it didn't happen, but Operation Northwoods. This was a proposed false flag attack on US soil that would justify going to war with Cuba. It was rejected by Kennedy, but approved by every man before him. It's stuff like this that makes the whole 9/11 inside job conspiracy sound a little less wacky, because this was essentially the same thing. The involvement in various Latin American countries during the Cold War was pretty ducked up. The things they haven't been caught for. We overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran when the people didn't vote for who we wanted. Edit. Down with the military-industrial complex. Great nations don't fight endless wars. Honestly, there's so many grotesquely ducked up things it's hard to pick just one. Not to mention there's so much that's classified that honestly we don't know for sure. The thread is bound to mention stuff like slavery, Tuskegee, MK Ultra, Trail of Tears, Iran-Contra, Jim Crow laws, Vietnam War, voter suppression, Operation Northwoods, the Patriot Act, pretending COVID is a hoax to short stock, bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, executing mentally disabled criminals, and the list just goes on and on and on. How do you pick a most ducked up thing? Currently, they are abusing the fact that the whole population is tunnel visioning on the corona pandemic to pass a highly controversial bill that will grant them access to every single phone call or message passed, sent, received on American soil, without warrant or court order. Edit. Okay guys, this comment officially has gained 50 times more upvotes than my most upvoted post, and first award ever too. Sheet. Edit 2. Source. Credits to ULVBB for this. Found this helpful summary of the bill. Actual bill for those that can read law. IT Act 2020. Edit 3. Okay, who is the crackhead who gave me plat? You want this chronological or alphabetical? Sent me a letter telling me that I had figured my taxes wrong. If they knew, why didn't they just do it for me? MK Ultra. Staging coups on democratic governments because they had oppositional ideologies. There is literally an entire wiki page on US staged coups, allowing one of its own town's water supply to be poisoned for financial benefit, appointing family to senior government positions, Agent Orange, declaring war on a nation based on a false pretense of fighting terror, while doing nothing to the actual country that orchestrated the attack, at the same time dragging other nations into this war and tearing relations with them. For example, France, who you would not exist without, because they didn't want to be involved, and then causing such instability that massive terrorist organizations blossomed out of it. Then patting yourselves on the back for fixing a problem that the US started in the first place. Except the issue is not even 100% fixed. Refusal to condemn terrorism from a particular viewpoint in order to protect your voter base. Denying their own citizens accessible healthcare, claiming it as something only people lucky or wealthy enough should have. But making weapons considered a basic right. Smallpox blankets. Literally having a civil war over slavery and being one of the last Western nations to make it unlawful. Systematic racial segregation to the point of drinking fountains, buses, laundromats, not even allowing them to walk through the same door, while simultaneously denying that this may have had a negative effect on huge swaths of these groups on a socio-economic level well into modern times, while also denying ongoing racism despite the fact that a huge chunk of the modern population was alive and well during those times of segregation, and had no issue with it, allowing large corporations to legally bribe politicians for outcomes that are unhealthy for the nation as a whole. Systematic pedophilia in the entertainment and business industries, and probably a lot more that was just not discovered yet. Allowing a media organization to publish and broadcast false information because the organization won with an argument claiming that their news was for entertainment and not for being factual, and making it up was more entertaining to the audiences. IDK, maybe some other it. Some details may be wrong, but I'll find links in the morning. Edit. Apparently smallpox blankets was a lie. I retract that statement. I'm gonna go with not doing anything to stop the brutal lynching, abuse and murder of African Americans up until the 60s. The government has been trying to take away all privacy. The Diego Garcia incident in the 1968, which is also one of the worst things the UK government has done. For the UK to continue purchasing nuclear missiles from America, they asked to rent out the British island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean to use as a naval base. The UK then subsequently sent soldiers onto the island, forced all of the inhabitants off of the island, killed anybody who resisted, destroyed all homes and killed all the animals so US soldiers could then turn the island into a naval base. Any ex-inhabitants who tried to speak out about the incident were immediately silenced and punished, and the details of the incident were only recently made public. The island is still a joint UK-US naval base to this day. Hard to rank them, but the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a US false flag operation to establish the pretext to invade Vietnam to stop the spread of communism, leading to the absolutely useless deaths of millions of military and civilians, only to have the US pull out and cede control of the entire country to communist control. The most ducked up thing about it is that our government knew it was an unwinnable war, but we stayed there anyway, throwing more bodies on the pile. The news media kept a daily running count of US dead. The US govt measured success in terms of number of enemy dead. Throwing citizens in internment camps during World War II. Burying and bombing of Black Wall Street. Shuffles deck picks card not doing anything about the AIDS epidemic. Gulf of Tonkin, and subsequently the Vietnam War. Please sit down. This might take a while. I don't know. How about irradiating pregnant women, minorities, hospital patients and your own ducking allies for a starter? The incessant need to overthrow democratically elected socialist leaders and or assassinating them and then planting fascist dictators in their place. Victims: Salvador Allende, murdered by US-backed coup in Chile. Patrice Lumumba, assassinated by CIA in DRC. Thomas Sankara, murdered by US and French-backed coup in Burkina Faso. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, ousted by US-backed coup in Haiti. Anyone care to add to the list? There's lost more, I'm sure. Oh, and the US literally invaded the tiny island of Grenada in the Caribbean to take down a socialist government. Sad. Decimated the Native American population, and then gave them the worst land and doomed them to poverty. The Dred Scott decision, involvement in the Vietnam War, Agent Orange, and slavery are the most ducked up that I can think of. Privatization for profit of our prison systems. The MK Ultra LSD mind control experiments from the 1950s. Trying to buy out the coronavirus cure. During the Vietnam War, the US dropped about 270 million bombs on the small country of Laos, making it the most bombed country in the world. Millions of bombs did not detonate and still posed danger to the people living there. Both of my parents had to emigrate from Laos because of this war. My dad told me that he knows civilian people who lost limbs and others who died because of the bombs. Over 90% of the people killed by these US bombs were civilians. Finance conflicts in South American and Caribbean countries to disprove the socialist economic theory and undermine the stability and integrity of communist governments. The eugenics movement, where disabled, also feeble-minded, and the mentally ill were sterilized against their will to improve the human race. Manifest Destiny. The only difference between it and Hitler's hunger plan was that Manifest Destiny worked. Most historians consider the US expansion westward as a genocide. Remember that time the CIA allowed a Nicaraguan cartel to sell sugar in America to fund a civil war? Basically started the 80s crack epidemic in black communities. Took half of my it in my ducking divorce. Good thing I hid most of my it in my friend Lenny's bank account. Duck you Cheryl, you cunt. Did everyone forget COINTELPRO? Or do you just know that it is still going on so you're afraid to mention it? COINTELPRO was the FBI-fed program to infiltrate and destroy any groups that were considered left on the political spectrum. It involved not only placing people in those organizations, frequently as agent provocateurs, but murder, financing militias, inside the United States mind you, and putting people in jail for life, many of whom are still there. That's the thing about COINTELPRO. For all we know, it's still going on. In fact, given the findings of some researchers on the Antifa movement, in which police put agent provocateurs into the movement to ratchet up violence so that the police could respond violently, it absolutely is still going on. Read. The other thing to note is that COINTELPRO wasn't a left or right program. It ran under both liberal and conservative administrations. Indian genocide and slavery. The overthrowing of legitimate governments to replace them with dictators in the name of fighting communism happened in Iran and all over Latin America. Labor camps after the bombing of Fallujah is pretty far up there. CIA overthrowing democratically elected leaders in South America and installing fascist regimes is towards the top 2. It's hard to say really. We have done some pretty ducked up it and it's hard to measure the impact. The invasion of Iraq in general was pretty bad. Sanctions against Cuba, Iraq and the USSR led to tons and tons of deaths. It would be hard to isolate the worst thing with the list being so long. Not the most ducked up thing but still ducked in the 1980s when the South distributed crack to the black communities. I remember the first time I watched Boys in the Hood, my dad explained that to me. Aiding Augusto Pinochet in a military coup against Chile, he reigned as a brutal dictator for decades. All because the US didn't like that they elected a socialist. I'm bemused that so few people are thinking of the whole system enforced human slavery thing. That really popped right into my head. Not a single act but breaking over 170 treaties with native people is pretty itty. This will likely get buried, but here's a fairly comprehensive list of atrocities committed by the US. Edit. Hey, thanks for the silver. Not paid taxes to the crown for 243 years. Look up the 10 stages to genocide. We got to step 8. Twice with the Native Americans and Japanese. Step 9 is extermination. We say that it could have never happened and that the US, as far as we went, would never go that far. Step 10 is denial. We just skipped step 9. Today, in the last hour, give us a window. Otherwise this can be a very hard task. Trail of Tears was likely not the worst, but still pretty damn awful. Their failed response to the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. They kidnapped children of Native Americans. I think the most ducked up thing is something they covered up so well, we'll never know it even existed. Guantanamo Bay, imprisoning and torturing people who had only made satirical cartoons, imprisoning a guy for knowing a person who was suspected of committing terrorist acts while said person was in another country and could not have possibly done them. Waterboarding prisoners just a little bit more than a decade ago. Having private companies market medical supplies to all the states, forcing them to compete against each other in order to secure supplies. New York was paying 85 cents a mask and now they have to pay $7 in order to outbeat other states. A real shame during this crisis. Besides slavery, the Trail of Tears, where they forced Native Americans out of their homeland to the west, just because they wanted their land, killed around 15,000 Native Americans. Tell me that's not ducked up. The Tuskegee experiment. We infected thousands of African American men and women with STDs, told them they were cured, and then monitored them for decades to test the disease progression. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were pretty bad too. Tough call, kill, imprison, and ruin the lives of its own citizens over recreational drug use, proxy wars over ideology, Iraq wars, allow Justin Bieber entry into the country? Capital I am lost for words. Is the history of the US government really this dark, gruesome and awful? The Trail of Tears was pretty ducking awful. Overthrow of a democratically elected president in Chile 1973. Between slavery, the countless US-backed coups of left-wing South American governments, the complicity of the genocide of East Timor, the genocide of the Native Americans, the mass illegal bombings of Cambodia, the ongoing endless wars in the Middle East, or the backing of Saudis in the genocidal civil war in Yemen, It's almost impossible to pick the worst from the depths of depravity my country dives into in the name of profit and capitalism. All the Middle East campaigns, but in particular Iraq, bombings killed around 100,000 civilians, and the Air Force used white phosphorus, which burns in air, melts skin and produces toxic gas. At times, civilians were specifically targeted and massacred, and no one was ever tried for these blatant war crimes. Additionally, the US government openly allows violation of human rights and torture and no one can stop them. Under US law, people who are rich enough can basically do anything, even by politicians. Everything the US did with the natives is pretty terrible. MKUltra, staging coups in any country they didn't agree with, sending 1,400 Cuban exiles with guns into Cuba against 20,000 Cuban soldiers and expecting them not to die, literally arming Al-Qaeda in the Cold War. Slavery, the Indian Removal Act, being trillions in debt, the Trail of Tears, where do I start? Gifting Native Americans with blankets infected with smallpox was pretty messed up. The whole Iran-Contra affair was about as shady comes, but the US has a history of trying to overthrow governments for their own personal gain regardless of the cost in the country. Iraq, Iran, Vietnam, Grenada, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, Panama, Samoa, Hawaii, Honduras, Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, China, Greece, Costa Rica, Albania, Syria, Egypt, Guatemala, Indonesia, Lebanon, Laos, Brazil, Cambodia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Poland, El Salvador, Chad, Yugoslavia, Palestine, Libya, Yemen, Venezuela. The US is a violent nation and they are not content with keeping their violence to themselves, so they have to take it to other shores to force their way of life on others. Millions die so their government can make a profit.